Welcome to Roll for Insight, the D&D podcast where we dive into the game, the lore, and the internet's favorite arguments. Grab your dice and your character sheet, and let's roll for insight. Hello, welcome to Roll for Insight. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the origin feat, Savage Attacker, out of the 2024 D&D Player's Handbook. So Savage Attacker is an origin feat that is available at character creation by choosing the Soldier origin, or by choosing it as a feat when you level up. Also, if you're using a background or origin from an older D&D version that doesn't provide a feat, you can take this as an origin feat of your choice. Now, this one should be obvious, but it is strictly a combat-oriented origin feat. So, in this episode, we'll be covering the description of the origin feat from the Player's Handbook. We'll review some gameplay uses, plus some benefits and limitations of the feat. We'll pull some ideas and opinions from the internet, and last, we'll end with some fun fact information about the feat. Okay, so first topic, the origin feat Savage Attacker. It's available to the Soldier origin. You've trained to deal particularly damaging strikes. Once per turn, when you hit a target with a weapon, you can roll the weapon's damage dice twice and use either roll against the target. Now, a few clarifications on the description. Savage Attacker looks extremely simple, but this is one of the most frequently misunderstood combat feats, so it's worth slowing down and being precise. So, once per turn. You can use Savage Attacker once per turn, not once per round. And that means it works on your turn, and it can also work on other turns if you're making attacks, for example, from opportunity attacks. You cannot stack it multiple times on the same turn, even if you have extra attack. So to clarify, a turn is when one person uses their action, bonus action, movement within the round, and others can use a reaction on that person's turn. And a round is top to bottom of the initiative order and represents 6 seconds of real time, and generally everyone gets a turn. Now, when you hit a target with a weapon, the key points here are this only applies to weapon attacks. It does not apply to spell attacks or damage-only effects. So it works with melee weapons, ranged weapons, and natural weapons if the DM considers them weapons. So this makes Savage Attacker primarily a martial-focused feat. Now, when you look at rolling the weapon's damage dice twice, this is critical and it's the cause of quite a few arguments, and it does seem to be table dependent how people are leaning towards it. So, in the 2014 version of Savage Attacker, it states that you can re-roll the weapon's damage dice, implying that you get to see the result before choosing the re-roll. So, if I see that I roll a 1, I decide to re-roll it. Now, the 2024 version states you can roll the weapon's damage dice twice and use either roll against the target, implying that this is not a reroll, but rather advantage on the damage dice. So I see that I roll a 1, I don't get to reroll because I had to choose to roll 2 dice ahead of time. So tables might handle this differently, so make sure you clarify with your DM. Now keep in mind you reroll only the weapon's damage dice. You do not reroll the ability modifier damage, the sneak attack dice, the smite damage, the maneuver dice, or any other bonus damage. You roll the weapon dice twice and choose which roll you want. Then add modifiers and extra damage normally. And this is why expectations matter with this feat too. Now, looking at some gameplay uses, Savage Attacker is very straightforward in application, but its value is going to depend heavily on how your character deals damage. So in combat uses, this is the only place Savage Attacker really operates. So you're using it to smooth out the bad damage rolls and avoid the low-end damage variance, and it just makes your damage output more reliable. It's especially useful when you're using weapons with the larger damage dice, and if you're landing fewer hits but harder hits, because you don't get to apply the extra roll to all of your attacks on your turn, even if you have extra attacks. So it's not strictly a spike damage feat, it's raising the floor of the damage that you're causing. So the question comes up, who gets the most value out of Savage Attacker? And it looks like it's going to be working best for the characters like the fighters using the great axes, the pikes, the glaives, like the D10s and the D12s. And then the great swords and the mauls that cause the 2d6s. Paladins who rely on weapon dice before adding smites are also going to find this valuable. And barbarians who hit hard but don't roll many damage dice per turn because they're usually getting 2 to 3 hits max are going to find the most value here. It works less well for the rogues because the sneak attack dice are much more impactful than the weapon dice. And then characters with lots of bonus damage riders aren't going to see as much value. So a few of the key benefits here: Savage Attacker is simple, it is easy to remember, and it can improve your damage consistency. And it's not a resource that you have to track because it's not limited in daily uses, only per turn. There's no action economy cost to it either, so you're not using a bonus action or a reaction to apply it. So Savage Attacker is functionally always on once per turn, and it makes it very beginner friendly because there are tons of rules already, and this makes it useful for new players. Now, there are some limitations as well because, again, expectation is especially important. The damage increase, it's modest at best, and it's predictable, so it's not giving you a big spike to your damage. It's also not going to scale with level or with extra attacks or with bonus damage dice. So as characters are gaining more damage riders, Savage Attacker becomes a smaller and smaller slice of that total damage. So it feels a lot more impactful at low levels. Alright, so looking at some discussion board topics on the internet, Savage Attacker has a long-standing reputation online, and opinions are kind of mixed about it. There's a common criticism that this feat is a trap because players are arguing that the average damage increase is small, and other feats are going to give you better returns. And in a lot of the cases, they are right. Numerically, they're correct. Savage Attacker doesn't compete with the high optimization damage feats, but it's not necessarily meant to. There's definitely a psychological element to this one too, because it can absolutely reduce the frustration from rolling low damage. There aren't a lot of things that are more frustrating to a level 1 barbarian who goes in and hits with their great axe, rolls a d12, and then lands a 1. So there's a lot of satisfaction to getting that advantage on damage rolls. So the real benefit is that there's some consistency versus the spike damage. Another very common take about this one is that it's a beginner feat. Savage Attacker is often recommended for the new players and the martial characters who don't want the complexity of other classes. Because this one is really easy to explain, it's really easy to remember, and it's hard to misuse it. But that simplicity seems to be intentional in the design. Now, to wrap things up with the fun fact information of the Savage Attacker feat. So Savage Attacker has existed in various forms across multiple editions of D&D. In earlier editions, the extra damage shows up typically as feats or flat bonuses or in expanded critical hit ranges. Now, interestingly, the word savage comes from the Latin word meaning of the woods and Old French meaning wild or untamed, and was eventually used to describe people as uncivilized, fierce, or barbaric. So it plays really nicely into the barbarian class. Now, where does this all leave Savage Attacker? It's not a flashy pick, and it's not going to redefine your damage, and it doesn't scale very well into late game, but at the right tables, especially with the low-level campaigns, it smooths out the frustration of low rolls, and it does reward the martial weapon-focused play. So it's a nice, simple, and reliable boost to your damage output. Well, that's it for this session of Roll for Insight. Thanks for listening, and thank you to all our supporters on patreon.com/rollforinsightpodcast. And we will see you next time.